We did that in Maker Sibley, and we thought it was very successful. We really, a bunch of DFLers came out of the woodwork.
We'll do it again.
Good.
Yeah,
So they're doing it in Meeker, McLeod, and Sibley counties as well, which is right in the neighborhood of where we are right now today. So I should mention, Ron mentioned, again, thanks, Barb, for the great chicken dinner today. If you're not with us today, stop in someday, find out when she's going to make the chicken again, because it's like I said, it's like eating my mom's chicken when I was a kid. So make sure you contribute in the basket if you haven't already on your way out. She's sharing that with the local DFL. So thank you, Barb, for slaving over a hot oven today in the heat. So where do you guys want to start in terms of the conversation? We have a lot of issues, some overlap.
Sam. Yeah, one of my questions that she read off was about the climate policy and how agriculture communities can really put forward more like pro-environmental policies. And I'm coming from a perspective where it seems to be that it's agriculture communities sometimes get this bad rap where they're not a part of the solution, even though the fact is they can very much are able to be a part of the solution. And I just want to hear what the communities can say about that specifically.
Sure. Anyone want to share thoughts on that, on what the ag communities can do or are doing already? Jeff, you've got a lot of farmers in your district.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about agriculture. I was the vice chair of the ag committee when I was at the legislature, and we had some great conversations about the future, not so distant future. One of the things the University of Minnesota is doing a lot of is research on other crops, and they have a real good crop called Kernza. And you might start hearing more about it. Kernza is a grain. It grows from a perennial wheatgrass, so it requires essentially no plowing at the end of the season. After you harvest the wheat, the Kernza grain, you can actually bring your cows into that field and graze off the leaves that are still remaining. So it's like a secondary benefit there too. The Kernza, I will tell you that General Mills and PepsiCo and a couple of other Fortune 500 companies are really, really, really looking forward to using Kernza in their products. But we need more farmers to raise Kernza in order for that to be available. One of the interesting things about Kernza is it has a 19-foot root structure, which makes it drought tolerant. As you look outside recently, I mean, the corn's rebounded, but the corn didn't look so good in this area a couple of weeks ago. But if we continue to have these sharp drought patterns, a thing like Kernza could survive those things for a longer period of time. Other things that we're talking about, or we did talk about the legislature, some of the things that we'd really love to see farmers adopt more policies on are cover crops, keeping that topsoil on the field and plowing in a crop of cover crop, 3 or 4 weeks before you plant another crop will give that field a boost of organic matter and nitrogen without you having to actually use the sprays and the chemicals to do it. And so, we're looking at the whole idea of agriculture is shifting. And I think, would love to have more strength, more voice, more direction on where this state is headed in terms of agriculture in a way that is more sustainable, that does factor in water usage and also the chemicals that leave the fields, and try to develop some sort of a policy moving forward where people can start adopting these programs, policies by using incentives, education. Nothing beats farmer to farmer contact. I will tell you, a neighbor talking to another neighbor, why does your field look so good? Mine looks like crap. That's the kind of conversations that are had at places like this. This is really the fostering ground for a lot of ideas. These cafes, these coffee organizations that people have. That's where we need to start educating the next generation. And oh, by the way, wouldn't it be nice if we had a next generation of farmers that were willing and ready to take on the land and the hard work. Farmers are deeply, deeply, deeply in tune with what they do. They love what they do. It's their favorite thing. And I found when I was in the legislature, farmers just want to be heard. They want to be acknowledged for what they do because it is hard work and they don't get paid a lot. But hopefully we can find cash crops that will earn them more money down the road, but not too far down the road because we want them to be supported now. So those are kind of my perceptions as a person that was kind of in tune to that in this area not too long ago.
Thanks, Jeff. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Just one follow-up.
Yeah.
If a farmer chooses to start planting that Kernza you mentioned, does that negate in any way the need for them to do any cover crops, or would they still need to do that, like, you know, to be more environmentally friendly, essentially?
So cover crops are more for row crops. Think of Kernza more like an alfalfa. It's everywhere. It's kind of flowing in the breeze, and it's kind of everywhere. It's kind of like a mat for the field, so to speak. And then it shoots up the wheat stalks with, of course, the wheat grain on top, just like a wheat field would look like, I guess. And so there wouldn't be any real need for a cover crop there because it kind of does everything it needs to. But think of like corn and soybeans, those conventional plants that they have in fields these days. Well, there are 5 or 6 months of the year where those fields are black, and that is money. And if it's blowing into the air into the next neighbor's field and the next neighbor's field, or in my snow, when I see it in St. Peter, it gets all black. I don't need their soil. They need their soil.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Yeah.
Alexander says he would also love to see more support around land access for beginning farmers. The consolidation of land has made it so difficult to find an affordable piece of land, especially if you want any infrastructure on the land.
Well, and Jeff, correct me, but I think I just read that land prices are going up and making it harder for young people to take over the farms or come into farming.
Just as a personal anecdote story, I'm looking for 10 acres near St. Peter. It's virtually impossible to find 10 acres. And it's not because the 10 acres aren't there. It's because those 10 acres are being raised with corn and soybeans, and those folks aren't selling right now. But the minute that they do sell, those lands will be sold, probably either by the neighbor who wants to continue to grow their acreage. You know, we've got a lot of folks that have 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 acres. Well, it's really hard for somebody, as they mentioned on Zoom, it's really hard for them to get 100 or 200 acres just to get a foot in the door. And those young farmers in particular, they have to rely off of mom and dad. Well, let's just say that they're a new American that don't have a mom and dad or a grandma and grandpa to buy that land from. And we're finding that from other cultures. You know, we took a tour of some Hmong farms near Hastings, and also the folks that are coming into our state from other countries like Somalia. They also would love to raise their own foods in a fashion that they would think is a little bit more acceptable, instead of just buying it from wherever they're buying it from, frozen and shipped, and it's not as fresh. We need to get to a point where we're starting to see more people have access that aren't your traditional farmers. And we're noticing that there are a lot more female first-time farmers. We notice there are a lot more people of color that are farming for the first time. So it's changing, but we have to provide a means for that to flow freely instead of being barriers in our government to doing that.
Good, thanks. Other things people want to get into here? Nancy?
I just wanted to say, hi, I just wanted to say that I just heard Senator Nick Friends today on my way down talking on NPR, and he was talking about the efforts that he and others in the state legislature are doing to expand farming, to let it go, bigger variety of people, to women, to people of color, and also to do what they could to make sure that there's some way of making it affordable for new farmers to start up. So he is one person who's working on it, and it sounds like there's others. And that's just good to know. We don't know if they'll get anything passed, but at least they're working at it.
Good, thanks, Nancy. More issues to bring up? Here we go.
Okay, you're holding
What
it.
is your name again?
My name is Roger Steinkamp. And well, I'll just say that I used to be a sheep milk cheese maker up in Hinckley, that I was bridging that divide. I had people that were, I called them urban refugees, that came out and bought 300 acres up north, and they didn't realize it was really crappy land. That's why it was cheap. And I had other people that I had some ranchers that I never thought I'd get out in the Dakotas and as far away as Utah, raising sheep and milking them. Now that's quite a stretch. And then on the other hand, I was marketing my products into Minneapolis and in the food co-ops and Byerly's, and was one of the first ones online, selling stuff online. So I was kind of stretched in between both extremes there. And I grew up on a farm right up here in Renville, not far away. So I really appreciate, I mean, there's nothing that boggles my mind more than the technology that we have now. If you go out on the field, I mean, we're literally combining, reading a newspaper. And I thought, wow, that's a long ways away from sitting out on an old Alice Chalmers 45D, itching from the chaff coming from the combine and getting sunburned out cultivating. And my dad, when 2,4-D came along, he said, God, imagine that. We're not going to have to pull weeds anymore. You know, and I thought, well, okay. But now fast forward, I was working over here at Farm America. Had a heck of a time to get anybody from security for us. You know, you understand that? You know, that ain't bad. But, you know, let's put our brain to rest. You got the power in your finger. It's called the off button. Turn off your cable TV. And that goes for MSNBC too. I did both. And I said, sit down, relax, and think about it. You know, that's even more interesting. But, you know, but the thing is, when we start talking about hospitals closing down and the big concerns about healthcare out here. Yeah. And I said, do you think that the folks in North Minneapolis don't have those concerns? I said, maybe we got something in common here, and maybe, and the argument out here is that, well, we didn't got no power. And I said, well, yeah, duh. You know, you're less than 1% of the population now. I said, who should pay attention to you? I said, you need, power is in numbers. And I learned that working in another place, but that's another story, is that the power is in numbers. You got no numbers. So why should we pay attention to you? Or why don't people pay attention to you? I said, one or two of you walks down the street screaming, or you get on your tractor and block traffic a little bit, which they don't, but they could. The French do. You know, they get attention. But if you formed an alliance with the people that have the same healthcare concerns in Minneapolis, suddenly you got numbers, and suddenly you're find common cause. Instead of talking about those people and pointing towards the metro area, and reverse it true, because I joined a lot of your groups, the 350 guys, they got the egg. People, we're sitting up there drinking coffee, pointing the other way and saying, well, those people. And the key words are that I picked up, they don't understand. Ironically, that's what they use in Eastern Europe when I worked there, is that you could manipulate people's minds because you say, oh, well, you know, they don't understand. Well, no, they do understand. You just got to listen to them. And so what I find is that, ironically, because I'd like to jump back and forth, we're talking about the same things, or many of the same things, maybe not all, but many of the same things, but we're just talking different dialects or something like that. And every opportunity we get, we go, aha, see, you know, and we try to find the difference. And instead of saying, well, you know, that kind of sounds like what I'm encountering. What, you know, people in the metro area, I used to argue with pig farmers down here. I said, you know what? They think that you're torturing these pigs in your barns. And I said, and there's videotapes that kind of, you know, could get people worked up about that. Well, why don't you take a lesson from Fair Oaks down in Indiana? They invite the public from Chicago, and I actually went there and took some denizens of Chicago out to Fair Oaks, and you know, they got a 10,000, maybe 15,000 cow dairy and a similar size hog operation, but they invite the public in. And I took some people who were pretty skeptical about this stuff, and they came out and they said, this is just great. And I said, really? I said, so what was so great? The cows are happy. You know, and I came away from there. I come back here and I said, why don't you just invite people out?
Yeah.
You know, if your barns are good, you know, talk to the guys down here and go, oh, no, we got biosecurity. And I said, as long as you keep the doors closed, they're going to think anything because they don't know. It's a black box. So maybe we just gotta tone down the rhetoric and say, you know what, come on out. And maybe we got to learn a little bit from each other, because, well, we could go on and on, but big ag does have problems. But that's another story. That's another issue. That's not urban rural divide. That's a big business problem that needs discussion. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. That's great.
You have to tell those people that are worried about the animals being happy that a farmer wants his animals happy because they're much healthier.
Oh, yeah.
You're not gonna starve your animals and treat them bad because they wouldn't produce.
Nancy's got something?
Yes, because just in talking about this, I think that if we got people out visiting, it would help on both sides. Because look what happened, you know, with the chickens. Remember the little small cages? And they started changing that and making much better places for the chickens to reside in once they could get people in to see what was happening. They're doing much better job, I think, now with hogs that, you know, aren't just barricaded. They're let free a little bit more. And so if more people came to see, the farmers would start doing a better job. And the people would find out that it wasn't so inhumane, because it wouldn't be anymore.
In the 70s, I had a discussion at college in the cafeteria. The other three at the table, two are from Chicago and one from Detroit. And confinement hog houses are new, and my parents had the first one in the community. And they couldn't figure out how it was humane to have pigs so tight together. I said, well, I went to the city and seen an apartment building. I thought the same thing about people. You learn how to get people to get along, we'll learn how to get the pigs to get along.
I don't know if this is, you know, right in the subject, but I don't know if you've seen the documentary Kiss the Ground, which is about regenerative farming. And it's also about the well-being of animals. And actually, it was so cool because a guy from Bismarck was outside of Bismarck was one of the main farms that they featured. And so if you get a chance to watch that, I think it has a lot to say about like Kearns. I mean, they weren't talking about Kearns specifically, but about that method of farming. So
Very good.
Say the name of that again?
Kiss the Ground, and it's on
Kiss
Netflix.
the Ground
Netflix.
on Netflix. Okay, we'll check that out. A lot of stuff dealing with ag misperceptions and some not. And I'm a town kid, so I'm glad Jeff is here to answer a lot of that too. But Roger is obviously, you were a great candidate last year, and you know your stuff on a lot of this too. So,
It doesn't sink in.
huh?
It doesn't sink in.
Other issues that,
I don't have the issues. I have a question for Roger. I learned a lot from what you were saying. It seemed to me one of your main points is that actually a number of the issues are the same issues in rural Minnesota as there would be in the cities. You were making that point.
Right.
What is obscuring that fact? Well, why is that not more easily realized by people?
In one word, propaganda. You know, the Russians used to be really good at it. I used to, when I was overseas, I'd listen to Radio Moscow and Voice of America and figure the truth was somewhere in between. And we get propaganda and people get into those echo chambers.
Yeah.
And we always think we got to solve somebody else's problem. I mean, I was talking with our police chief and you know, well, we don't have a problem in Faribault. I said, so why are you worried about the problem in Minneapolis? Why do you want to send the National Guard in there? I think the people up there are just asking for a say in how their police are run, and they're suffering from what they have, and it's their problem to solve. So why don't we just lock arms with them and help them solve their problems? You don't have to worry about going in, sending in the cavalry to fix it for them, because you're probably not. And you're just going to make it worse. And so I think that, you know, instead of looking why they're different and saying they don't understand, well, they don't, you know, if I talk to a hog farmer here, oh, they don't understand that my hogs are happy. Well, let's be honest. In some of these farms, they're not happy. And you got to realize that. When I came back from Fair Oaks, they have a different system. It's concentrated hog farming, yes, but those hogs in there don't look like the hogs on the farms here in the crates. And but yet, yeah, and other countries, you know, you go to Sweden, they have to pet them with straw. You know, so let's not be adverse to looking somewhere else and maybe take a hard swallow and say, well, gosh. And the point I make to people now in agriculture out here is that don't look at the folks in the cities as your enemies, for goodness sakes, as some foreigners. They're your customers. They're the ones that are buying this stuff. And don't go around telling me that you feed the world. Well, I can safely tell you, I've been in a couple of countries where I brought in a couple barges of 15,000 tons each, and they didn't want your corn. I'm sorry.
Not the right color.
Yeah. And so, yeah, well, that's another story for another day. We'd have to have a beer instead of coffee to talk about that. But I think that, you know, looking for understanding, if you're suffering from healthcare out here, and you are, and your hospitals, what's the common cause we got underneath? Well, I think it's the insurance and pharmaceuticals and the system. We have that in common, and we're both getting bit by it. You know, if you want to talk about feeding the world, what I was, for a while, I was going to the Ag Council that they have up in the cities, you know, the big guys get together. And I was amazed. You got people from General Mills and Pillsbury, the big guys coming in saying, we can't get enough organic oats to make our Cheerios. And we can't get enough of this. And I said, are you listening? I said, that's what the reason they're saying that is because they're a little bit closer to those people, those consumers up there. And that's what they're asking for. And isn't that what kind of like, you know, you like to promote capitalism and free markets and stuff? Well, that's what they're asking for. So why don't you produce it? Well, it's because Bayer and, you know, used to be Monsanto. I could get everybody's hair standing up if I said Monsanto. But, you know, those evil people. Well, you know, actually I did have tea with the granddaughter of Pierre DuPont one day, and she was a nice lady. You know, she's just living on her 350-acre garden out there. And but the thing is, these companies have a lot invested, had millions, and how are they going to recoup it? Well, you got to buy their product. Yeah, they got to sell their product. And how do they sell their product? They got to convince you to buy it. And so we have to take a deep breath and say, where are we headed with our agriculture? Where I don't know, I don't think I know a farmer who doesn't consider himself or herself a steward of the land. It's their responsibility to take care of that land. And they really feel it deeply. But there's so much other noise going on that you could easily be convinced that the way you do it is to get, now we stack the GMOs, and I'll admit, there's a part of my heart that when I look at a nice clean field with no weeds in it and all the corn is just growing nice and they got the little nice standy up ears and you're getting all hundreds, what did we get, 260 is average now?
Yeah.
Well, that was an impossible dream when I was growing up. And we can do that, but we got to think a little farther at what cost. And I get in my Wayback Machine and go talk to the Dakota. And how did they survive on this land for like 10,000 years? And it didn't look any worse for the wear. And what does our groundwater look like now? Let's be honest about it and take a look. Well, it ain't so good. And all you have to do is follow our laws. The wells are getting deeper. Why? Because you don't want to drink the stuff in the aquifers shallower. So, you know, let's take stock of where we're at and then chart where we want to go. And that comes back full circle to government policy. The Europeans got off the train before it hit the cliff. We're still on the happy train headed for the cliff. They tried to keep more of their people on the farm because it's cheaper maintaining them in a rural setting than it is on unemployment in an urban setting. And so they were a little more astute in their policy making. So we need to, you know, stop, think about it. And I was, you know, the good side of COVID is I was hoping that people had more time alone and maybe they had more time to reflect. And maybe it doesn't seem like that happened, but some did. Yeah, it was good.
Marcus, I think we have one back here.
No question.
I was going to say what you said about it's cheaper to keep people on the farm. That I come from a little tiny town in North Dakota on the Canadian border, 5 miles from Altona, which was when we were growing up, this way smaller town than ours. But now because the government has subsidized people, because they want more population on the borders, they have subsidized like mortgages, all kinds of commercial development. I mean, that town is like now 10,000. My hometown is now 900. And I think that is something that would be really beneficial. And also, this is not in America, but when I traveled in Italy, they have what they call agro-tourism, where they get farmers to do something like have a wine, you know, they have a winery. And so that winery is part of their agriculture to keep more farmers on the farm. So.
Lisa, did you have something?
This is a question from Joe Nathan on the Zoom. Are there any parents of K-12 students or K-12 educators in the room? If yes, would any of you be interested in potentially creating Zoom meetings involving Greater Minnesota and urban students discussing issues of mutual interest? This could help promote greater mutual understanding. Many years ago, a school I worked at did this, not via Zoom, obviously, but by in-person visits. But the Zoom meetings might lead to some in-person exchanges. So starting when the kids are younger, sounds like building those bridges. So are there any parents here or any educators in the room or any kind of thoughts around that?
I'm not seeing anyone, but Roger's a former teacher.
No, but you're absolutely right. And we have to, what programs I've seen many times, I mean, I'm an avid FFA guy. I mean, was in it all my life and used it as a model in other places. But, the FFA is a good example where they've moved into the urban setting and they provide opportunities. I think there's room for a lot more to get kids from the urban areas out here. And it's not to be an apologist for what we're doing. It's to engage them and learn from them too. I used to place students from Europe on farms across the Midwest, and I had to kind of clue the farmers in that I was placing them. These are like 18 to 26-year-olds. I said, be aware that the person you're getting who is coming here thinking that he's going to learn from you, you're actually going to learn from them because they're actually kind of a little bit ahead of us in many areas. And they do farming a little bit differently, but you could learn from them. And I had to tell the students that were going out to the farms, I said, just be aware, it may not be the land of milk and honey that you might have imagined before you came. And generally speaking, both were true. The farmers who benefited the most were the ones that took the kids in, or I call them kids, but now, because I'm an old fuddy-duddy, but that would take them in and learn from them. And the opposite was true, that they came back to me with all kinds of stories like, geez, we didn't think you were that far behind. So.
Thank you. So I asked a question and I think I'm still waiting for, I'd like to hear some responses from some of our.
You want to ask it again?
I'm saying, so I am a lifelong Minnesotan, born and raised in Big Stone County and proud of it, but I've now lived in the city for roughly 40 years. However, we have a farm in Cottonwood County. And so we have a foot in the city and a foot in the country. And I love rural Minnesota, as I love all of Minnesota. So what I am seeing is not, to me as a Minnesotan, is not healthy to see the depopulation continuing. And when I was, I'll date myself, when I left Big Stone County in 1978 because of lack of opportunity and to get my further education, I didn't see that I really had a choice. And of course, being an out gay man at the time would have been problematic as well. But that said, I really think this latest census is troubling for me. And I think we as a state need to make some dramatic changes to help rural Minnesota and not only the regional centers. I appreciate, Redwood Falls or the Mankato's or St. Cloud or Moorhead. But what do you see as policies that we as a state, Governor Walz, and if we take back both houses of the legislature, that we actually can do to help regrow, provide for rural Minnesota to grow and prosper was my specific question. So I really want to know, because I'll tell you, I think there's a huge amount of affinity between inner city folks like myself and rural Minnesota. Urban ag production and knowing where your food's coming from is just huge. People in Minneapolis are really, really interested in growing their own food supply. Thanks.
Okay. Lisa, do you have?
I have, yeah, just one more part to. Here. The answer that I can think of, which is probably not very doable, but we need to have our companies and our businesses back that supported these small towns. The one business, like the Green Giant business. You know, stuff like that. How can that be done? How can they be returned? Yeah, Sleepy Eye lost its Del Monte plant. So similar, but you know, that tells us that people are going for usually more fresh foods instead of the canned foods. Luckily, it's been replaced by like a pet treat business that's coming in and taking it over. Other suggestions from our rural folks on what one or two things that we could do in terms of policy to help us out here? Nancy?
Well, I just want to say that, you know, when Governor Wendell Anderson was here and we did the Minnesota Miracle, that did a lot to make a difference because he changed the tax policies where we had local government aid. He changed the education funding, which that was changed by the Republicans to a less healthy area. But I noticed as a lobbyist for small cities in rural Minnesota and traveling the state, part of it has to do with those in our rural communities themselves. Mm-hmm. I could visit two cities 20 miles apart. And one of them, when they got extra money, put it towards fixing their communities, making them more, you know, welcoming, having more amenities, that type of thing. And the others would save tax dollars. And that depended on who was in charge and usually which party was in charge. Sure. But a lot of it has to do with us ourselves. And we have to do more, I think, to find out what are those good qualities? How can we expand them? How can we make things look better? How do we deal with the fact that we no longer have small businesses in our small communities? That's very tough. What can we do with those businesses to make them look attractive, be attractive? In Dassel, we have, you know, like some businesses that come in once a month for 3 days and just have, you know, sell kind of antiques and that type of thing. But it's really, the town looks better. People come to it because of that. If they can come for something, then they will come to eat. Then they will come and look. And everything you do yourselves. So we have to do a lot of this ourselves. And that's important. But thank goodness for government in Minnesota, because our small towns look so much better than the small towns in the states around us.
As a former local government official, I was a county commissioner for 14 years. I'd like to encourage Democrats to run for local government office. Maybe it's your township supervisor. They usually are begging when their guy wants to retire, begging for someone to take over as township supervisor. City councils in small towns are usually begging for qualified candidates. Try getting on your school board. That's how the Tea Party took over, was they started coming in and taking over some of those local government offices. They got their names out there. And then before anybody knew how toxic they were, they got elected to different boards. And Democrats used to do that, and they don't do it anymore. But that's really, if you ever consider running for the legislature, try being a township supervisor or county commissioner first. We need to get Democrats in those lower offices. They don't pay very much. It's maybe $1,000 a year or $500 a year, but they do pay something, and you will get your name out, and it shows that you're really committed to the community. I think that's a solution for getting some of our Dems elected out here, because people will elect Democrats if it's somebody, a known quantity, somebody that they respect and they know locally. They will vote for them. So I was county commissioner for 14 years. They I was kind of a stealth Democrat. They figured it out sooner or later. Put a Tea Party guy in. Fortunately, only lasted 2 years. So, but it's important. So that's one solution to getting more Democrats from rural.
So that was a great point. I actually was a city council member before I ran for higher office, and gave me a great experience learning about local issues. And nobody knows local issues better than local government officials, right? Jeffrey, to answer your question, a couple of observations. I travel southwestern Minnesota a lot these days for my job, and the other day I was in Darfur. And it was just a small town, kind of by Windham, in between Windham and New Ulm. If you look at geographically, if you don't remember where Darfur is. It's a small town. It's got a Legion post, I believe. Doesn't have a theater. Doesn't have a lot of restaurants to choose from. It doesn't have a mall. It doesn't have a lot of things that young people are looking for these days, right? The amenities of life. So when an 18-year-old grows up and decides to go off to college, they go to communities that have those amenities and they get used to those amenities. And I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I grew up in Howard Lake, west of the metro, small farm community. I don't live there. I live in St. Peter because it has a lot of the things I'm looking for. Good teachers to raise my children, education, an emphasis on colleges nearby, just in case they want to stay close to mom and dad someday. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people in that community that think, that believe the things that I believe. And at the end of the day, I'm supporting businesses that support my ideas and my thinking too. And so what a lot of people graduate from college and they go to the metro area and they get those jobs that pay really well, that allow them the opportunity to have 2 or 3 kids in a home and find that American dream. We're all searching for the American dream, whatever that is. But for a lot of people, it's 2 or 3 kids, 2 vehicles, a nice home, comfortable living. And a place like Darfur is not going to provide that for them. And so the kids leave. And then they live in places like Bloomington or Apple Valley or you name it, right? Well, what happens when the parents decide to retire, and where do you think they go? We were just talking about a mutual friend that's going to follow their kids, right? The kids live up in the Twin Cities, and that's where they're going to go. Darn it, we just lost 2 more DFL votes down here in southern Minnesota. But the thing about it is people are migrating to where their families are and where the kids are. And this is not something we can change tomorrow. This is something that's a generation removed from where we should have been fixing the problem in the 1980s and the 1990s. Well, what we can do is we can create a new Minnesota miracle where we reinvigorate our rural areas, where we provide new opportunity. Remember President Obama, he talked a lot about hope. Gosh, give people hope and they'll do anything, right? Give people hope that their community can grow and prosper. And that's a job of local officials and county officials and state officials and folks like Dean Phillips at the federal level too. We have to provide hope for the future, and we have to plant those seeds for tomorrow, and they can't be planted overnight. They have to be planted in a generation. And so we're starting to see more people migrate out in the Twin Cities, but you know what? Their quality of life just isn't as good as some of our communities out here. And I bet there, just for as many people that are flowing to the Twin Cities, there are people flowing out of the Twin Cities. And we've got to capitalize on that. We've got to find that milieu of things that they're looking for and bring it to places like Worthington, and to bring it to places like Darfur or Windham or Winthrop for that matter. One of the comments was talking about Worthington and where we organize in Worthington and that sort of thing. There's a large Hispanic population in Worthington, and the DFL did some work to organize in Worthington after some pretty awful things happened down there not too long ago. And they also organized around their school referendum that did pass, but it didn't pass by a wide margin. And if nobody took the time to reach out to the Latinx population in Worthington, their school district wouldn't be as good as it is today. So we can't ignore opportunities to go into these communities with these pop-up stands and these cookies and lemonade and things like that and say, hey, welcome. Let's have a conversation about your county, your district, your community. And when somebody writes something in the Star Tribune, this is from my personal experience. In 2019, some guy from St. Cloud shot off a letter to the editor in the Star Tribune talking about how all those people in the metro area, and they started just like railing on folks in the metro area. They're no good. We don't need them. We just need to be our own country, our own state, rather, away from those metro people. And God, I thought of that. I thought, well, I'm in the state legislature. I represent a rural area. That's nonsense. I wrote a letter to the editor and refuted every point that guy had. And I'm telling you right now, we all have to carry that spark. And when somebody's fire goes out, they lose faith, they lose the opportunity. We have to provide them with that spark to think alternatively to what we're thinking, to make them think logically about where they actually live. St. Cloud is not some rural area. That's St. Cloud. It's just like Mankato or Rochester. There's a lot of opportunity in a place like St. Cloud. We can't let people feel disillusioned, but we also can't make people feel disillusioned in places like Darfur or Worthington or Winthrop, for that matter. We have to be ready to have the conversations. We have to be willing to provide opportunity to look at the future. That's really what it's about. So Jeffrey, I hope that helped trigger something in your mind as an answer. But let's continue to have that conversation. This is something that's not going to be solved between you and I or the group of us. But as a party, we can't forget hope, opportunity, those chances for the future generations.
I got a couple from Zoom. Alexander says, support for small businesses that are on main streets, more support in finding affordable housing and affordable childcare, more bipartisan community building efforts, conversations and events. And then he goes on to say that there's an organization, strongtowns.org, has examples of policies that help support stronger towns. And then Guillermo says, we, the DFL Latino caucus, are going to be increasing our effort in rural Minnesota.
Wonderful.
Good to hear. And I'll just add, I think with the bigger investments that we're making in broadband, I think that's going to help over time, because we saw with COVID how many people really do like to work from somewhere other than the office. And some people, maybe don't want to live in the metro and want to be able to work out here from home for a company that might be centered in Bloomington or elsewhere. George?
Good morning. There was a friend of mine who wanted to put a good size server farm, but also programming and development for systems up in, I think it was Vermilion. And the problem, he was far along, and it turns out he just couldn't get the speed. And so there are people in the metro area who want to do this and go out there, and they can't because they don't have it. I hope that issue at the federal level now is getting a lot more attention, especially here at the state level. Also, it just has to happen. It should be on the order of rural electrification.
Amen.
The Rural Caucus supports that, and I think it's probably one of the less partisan issues that we can work on to make it happen. But the state had a nice sized investment in it, and hopefully we'll see that federally too. So other things people want to bring up?
I know the Farm Bill had 50 million a year for broadband, but divide that by 50, $1 million isn't a lot. So that's where we push
Talking to the mic.
I'm sorry, people on Zoom. I was just mentioning in the Farm Bill, the last Farm Bill that passed, there's 50 million a year for broadband. But if you divide that by 50 states in the country, that's $1 million. That doesn't provide a lot of money for broadband. That might be for planning, but it's not going to actually get it to your house. So we have to push our federal folks to see the bigger picture too. That rural electrification is a great example. I mean, my grandparents, they could have told you the day they got electricity in their home for the first time in their lives. Yeah, isn't that something? It's just amazing to me that people still can remember when electricity came to their homes. What were they doing before then? Living in caves, obviously, because they didn't have electricity. But there are people who are literally living in a virtual cave because they don't have broadband access. And by providing it, now they can maybe do some things in their farm fields to kind of map out where the inputs need to be put, and then they can be more smart about the farming techniques. But it requires a satellite, or it requires broadband access in order for all that to work. So
I just wanted to thank Joe Nathan for talking to us, and he was asking us about getting people, parents, or young people together with young people from the metro area. We're mostly gray-haired out here. In general, we are, and in this room, we are. But really appreciate Joe Nathan has done some amazing things with education. I thank you for that, and wish there was some way to get us together doing that type of thing. So I just want to
Let's
say
make sure
thank
we
you.
have his name and contact so we can try and find someone. Ron's got it.
Zoom, and thanks everybody for, you being a part of this. But we're going to send up follow-up information to everybody. Hopefully we'll have your email address so you can get the follow-up information. But, and so that information will go into that. We'll have, put his question and then his contact information.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So we've kind of gotten into some of the, solutions with Jeff's question, solutions and remedies. Are there any others that, and Roger actually brought some up as well. A lot of it is just getting together a lot more like this. So maybe that's something we're going to do in the future.
Thank you, both of you, for moderating. Appreciate it. I have more of an observation than a question, but I grew up in a place you might be familiar with called Silicon Valley. And there's a little bit of creativity and innovation that goes on there, and lived in San Francisco. So I've been in a urban suburban environment my entire life, but there's an observation. Thank you, by the way, for coming. We appreciate it. That is that people, generally speaking, over a period of time, make a good income. They raise a family, or they have a family or neighbor, identity. And eventually they look for, number one, a place for a summer home, a cabin, a retreat, something for family or friends or business, whatever it is. Here it's the family cabin up north kind of thing. But in California, it's a little different. Or a place to semi-retire to when they're in their 50s or 60s, when they're looking toward retirement. But heck with it. Let's go get a place by the lake, and let's do that now. And we'll evolve into retirement. They're looking for a rural environment. The urban and suburban people see their retreat, their rest, their relaxation, their coming to sanity as going to a rural environment, which I think is really interesting. Okay. And of course, they're looking for peace and quiet, but once they get there, they need amenities like broadband and restaurants and whatever it is. But I've seen this my entire life of the search for a great rural environment from an urban or suburban environment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Although you'd be surprised at how many great restaurants we have on our, a lot of people would. Like some of the best food, I think, is at places like this.
Amen.
Thanks.
32. 3. Yeah. Yeah.
So some of the folks mentioned something about childcare is a big issue. It's a big issue. It really is across Greater Minnesota. And I worked with a group called the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities to pass some legislation. It was in last year's bonding bill, which we didn't pass until October of 2020 last year, almost towards the end of the year. But essentially what it did was it provided $50 million worth of money in Greater Minnesota to provide childcare centers for cities or counties in rural communities. We weren't successful in getting any money but I was successful in building the program. And so some of these federal dollars might flow into the program through deed. Where I'm truly hopeful, even though I'm not there right now, I'm still lobbying to try to get some of that money to flow in there. Because wouldn't it be nice if a community that needed a childcare, like maybe a good example of this is Cokato. There's a church that's sitting vacant in Cokato, and there's a group of people that want to get their childcare out of their home and into a community center-based environment. That's a great marriage there. But there are places all over the state where that's a great opportunity. Now it's matching funds. And so 50 million really is 100 million investment in greater Minnesota. So a lot of these smaller communities can now have childcare facilities they didn't have before. Childcare is incredibly hard. I've got 2 kids. I wouldn't want to do it for a full-time job. Sometimes it's really difficult to raise my own children. It's like, it's tag teams. Sometimes I tag my wife and say, you're it. I'm going to go outside for a couple of minutes. But it takes a really determined type of person to want to make a business like that go. It doesn't make a lot of money. Childcare is one of those fields where it's subsidized by the spouse oftentimes. It doesn't make a lot of money. Oh boy, we need childcare. We truly do. If we really want those moms and dads to go back to work, we have to give them the opportunity to take their children to a center or to a home, in-home service, and then they can get out to work knowing that their kids are going to be safe and cared for and educated along the way. And so that's one opportunity with childcare. I really see that as an important issue in greater Minnesota, something that we need to tackle more at the legislature. And so write your legislator and tell them, hey, look, there's a program, it needs some funding, move on it.
Just keeping in our communities too.
You bet.
Just a quick question. So I'm Sam. I live in Minneapolis. So I'm just kind of curious. Like, we have a lot of conversation today about like just a lot of issues that it seems to be a lot of people are on the same page with.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been experience or success in organizing in rural Minnesota around issues as opposed to a party or as opposed to any other way? And what did that look like?
Anyone on? Lisa? And I said, do you have anything?
I was thinking locally, perhaps at the city council level or at a county commissioner level, or maybe even township supervisors and that sort of thing. That's a great opportunity because a lot of these issues are nonpartisan issues. Republicans need childcare. Democrats need childcare. It's a nonpartisan issue. Those are, I think, real good opportunities where you could actually create like a council type of an environment. You want somebody to win a city council seat. We remember talking about DFLers locally elected. Get somebody to run on childcare. They'll win. I guarantee it. And, there's some opportunity there for sure. But I think, at the state level, it's where we become good partners. At the federal level, that's where we have to be good partners with those local folks. It takes, many hands, make light work and that sort of thing. And so sometimes it's federal dollars that subsidize local dollars for childcare.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sam, on that, is to hit the issues. And the problem we have is Democrats. I mean, in my neighborhood over in Faribault, I live on the side of town where all of my neighbors are either Somali or Latinx, and one thing we all have in common, and working poor, or you could say low income folks. We got a great neighborhood. The kids all play together. Yeah. They play in the streets. I'm worried about them getting hit, but that's, it's a great neighborhood in that sense. But I would guess, it's statistically about a third don't vote. And we lose by about a third. Well, it's a lot less than that. We could win that county. Why don't they vote? They said, well, neither party does anything for me. Now the Republicans are smart enough. When we hit I don't know, I kind of coined them the Faribault ghettos, or those trailer parks. And I thought that must be one place where the GOP doesn't go. Well, they do. They do. And when I finally just said, well, damn the weather, and 3 or 4 of us, we hit the trailer parks last year and pamphleted them. Guess who was there the day before? My competitors. Well, serendipity, we kind of pulled their brochures out and put ours in, but But I thought that that would be a strong side for us in the DFL because we hit the issues right on the head. But the response I get, well, what did you deliver? Yeah, we're for childcare, but what did they see on the ground? Not much. And so we can talk a good line, and guess what? The GOP talks a good line too. If you read through their pamphlets, why you would think that they're good, that the sun's going to come out tomorrow. Well, it never does. They just make it more cloudy. It's propaganda. And they're not adverse to saying anything. And, you know, and we tried to be overly cautious of, well, you know, we can't say anything that isn't, you know, just even an exaggeration. Well, yeah, we can. I mean, why not? We can exaggerate. But on the other hand, the day we deliver and they can touch it, they'll vote. That's what they're waiting for. I mean, that's why they're discouraged. You know, I talked to two ladies sitting in on the front steps. It was almost like a movie. They were sitting there smoking, and one was obviously probably getting towards the end of her pregnancy already. And they laughed. They looked at me and they said, "You know, you're talking to two poor white women here." And I said, "Yep." And I said, "So," and I could see that they were trying to clean up their language a little bit because they thought I was more sophisticated or something there. They didn't want to hurt my ears. And I said, "You don't have to worry about that." I said, "You know, let's just sit here and talk a while." But at the end of the day, their disappointment was nobody cares about us and nobody does anything. And I emphasize the do. We got to do something that they can feel, touch and feel. And the minute we do, they'll be there for us, I think. Or at least that's my.
Well, and I'll say in many cases, we're delivering, but we're not messaging well on it.
Yeah.
And the people who are really good at messaging need to come out and be present here, not do it from, you know, on the TV or online or something. Like small towns like your presence here at their events or
childcare providers that are kind of operating in the gray area because nobody can afford it, but they need the service. And anything, the day that we can help them or to the point where they'll come out and say, "Hey, you know what? I felt the difference this year." Why? Oh, it's because the legislature did this and this, or my representative did this and this, or the city did this and this. You know, and local politics, I couldn't agree more. You know, get in there because the American Enterprise or something like that, those guys are messaging out to the GOP through their county organizations, and they're hitting our schools. And so we decided to fight back, and we organized and we walked in for public comment too and talked back on this CRT stuff. You know, I just went in and I said, "What are you guys talking about? You're blabbing about state standards, subverting our children and making them communists and turning them into all kinds of un-American things and stuff like that. It's not there. It's not there." And I just read to them the one or two state standards. I said, "Do you see that in here? Really? You must be hallucinating, or you're taking something that makes your brain go funny." But they're not adverse to that, and they have their talking points, and they're very well organized going into our local school boards, city councils, and stuff like that. So I think we can be more astute in what, you know, we can do that too, and fight back. And it doesn't take it took me a day to figure it out, but just reading through the state educational standards, it's only a couple pages, not a big deal.
George?
Just for everybody knows, Lisa and I are here, and we have a little outfit called Connections Lab, and we do training and messaging. We've been doing it for really in earnest for about 7 or 8 years with the support of the state park. And we've done this way more. We have done way more workshops in rural areas than we have in metro. It seems to be hard to get metro people to sit down and do anything. We've got, that's one reason we're here today, is because we've seen, you know, and talked with people around the state. We're in Brooklyn Park, so we're sitting here, right? But we've spent a lot of time in these meetings because this information needs to be everywhere in the state. The old, the 50 state program of how we're being, well, the same thing needs to happen with the DFL. I've been always a big believer in that. Yeah. We'll come out here to Windsor.
One Minnesota.
Okay, but they can't hear you on Zoom because you're not talking into the mic.
I'll make this real short. We are, Lisa and I have connections lab, and we're pretty darn folks, and we go around and do this training, and we've done it for a long time, and we've done more training in rural areas, so we would do it in rural areas around Minnesota if we haven't been in that area yet.
Hi, again, this is Nancy Larson again. First of all, thank you to George and Lisa, because they do a great job. I've been to a couple of their workshops. But I wanted to say, one of the things that Jamie Harrison said the last time, I think we were on the rural group, he said, D needs to stand for delivery, that we have to deliver what we promise. And that's one thing I found. The groups that I've worked with that have been about issues have been excellent groups. Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, Take Time Minnesota, that group that starts with an I never can remember what it is. No, not Isaiah. I've worked with them too, but there was that other group that just, it's sort of like a indivisible. For some reason, I can never, that name just escapes me. Worked with a lot of them, but then if you can't put it into working at the Capitol, what good is it? I'm sorry, you have to have some way to get things done, and you have to be able to push those people to get it done, and then and then you have to deliver. But it's really important that we do that. And one thing that I found, I remember the year that we really lost out in the 7th Congressional District, really bombed, and we have never recuperated. We've lost ever since. That year, the Democrats did a huge amount at the state capitol for rural people. I wrote up a whole list of this is what they did. This is what the Democrats worked for. This is what the Republicans did, because you have to let them know, both sides. I wrote it up. I tried to get out to some of our candidates. I tried to get it out to the state DFL, to people there. No one accentuated that. From the state level. It was, most people did not know anything. The Republicans did. They took credit for the things that Democrats did. Democrats didn't. And guess what they advertised out here that year when our candidates were running? Gun control and anti-pro-life things. All these issues that do nothing out here. And I've been trying ever since to work with people at the Capitol on how you can sell issues out here. How do you get people elected out here? And how do we do that? And they're sort of starting to get it now. Really late. We have three legislators in the whole 7th. We used to be a whole ton of great legislators out here. Most of our legislative leadership was from out here. And now we have one senator and 2 House members, and that's really sad. But unless we sell it ourselves, where's it going to go? And out here, I can send it to a newspaper, or maybe even 6 newspapers. That's not going to go everywhere. We have to do something better on the top level.
Next time, make sure to send it to me.
Okay.
So do we have,
However I can.
do we have some consensus on conclusions we can take away from today? We've got a lot of issues that we didn't even cover, and
I had a question. And I just do a wind up on Zoom too, and everybody out, just putting people on Zoom.
okay. You have others who need to, okay.
And about helping childcare and housing, low-cost housing. There's one solution to that, both rural and urban, and that's to raise the minimum wage. People can afford it better. When people can afford better childcare, the childcare businesses stay in business better. Seattle was the first city to raise the minimum wage to 15, and it was according to the textbook, just like I learned in business classes. The first 6 months, there's no increase in jobs. But when businesses get increase in revenue 6 months, that's when they expand. Before that, they'll add a little overtime. They find ways to cover the current increase in business. But after 6 months in Seattle, the number of jobs noticeably went up. Now, the conservatives say people will get laid off. I lived in South Dakota when we passed the minimum wage raise by referendum because the legislature would have never done it. And there's all this talk about little towns can't afford it. I never heard one business in the news that went broke. I didn't hear of any, big layoffs. That part never came through the news that any problems came from it. Things just kept rolling along. They may have raised the price of pie a little and paid the wages a little more. But, like in Seattle, in 6 months, the number of jobs went up instead of down. And if you look at where it really happened and it worked, I think that's a good way to sell it because people want to go by the short-term look that it might not work right away.
Oh, I didn't have my hand.
Somebody.
Did you want?
I'm looking at the education and I feel that too many times landowners share the big brunt in many school districts now for education or for the school board referendums that come up. And that's why they fail many times because the tax usually ends up on the farmland because the communities have gone so much smaller. There's fewer small businesses, fewer homeowners in town. So their proportion of what they pay to keep the school going actually goes down. And many of the farmers, their kids are already gone, long gone. They don't really have a stake in the school district that much anymore because they are not raising kids. They don't have kids going there. Their grandkids are up in the cities or in larger communities. The state really needs to start taking over some of that funding for schools that need to be replaced because a lot of schools out here, they were built 40, 50, sometimes 60 or even 70 years ago, and they're wearing out. They're beyond their life expectancy. And if you keep asking the people that don't have kids to fund them, they're not going to get funded. And that's really unfair to our education system. We need to find a different way in which the cost of education is spread out much more equitably across the state. And that's just unfair because if you have a rich community, they have a beautiful, wonderful school. But if you have one that's basically rural and the farmers don't have kids going there anymore or fewer, those go down to defeat and they end up with the old rickety schools and they're not competing. They need to be brought up to modern educational standards for everybody. That means good internet connections, proper accessibility for everybody, because in most schools, they don't have elevators, or in a lot of schools, they don't have elevators. You break your leg, you're trying to go up and down stairs between classes on crutches. Hey, that's, it's only one or two, fine. But no, it's not fine. They get late to classes. They get discouraged. Teachers say, well, you should leave earlier. Well, how can they leave earlier? They can't leave class before the other kids do. The state needs to take over our funding for our school districts, for buildings, for sure. It's just unfair otherwise. Sorry.
Well, we're going to the next person for a question, and then Barb wants to also talk too. To answer your question directly, in 2019, in the tax bill, we actually increased the ag to school farm tax credit each year an extra 5% from 2019 to 2023. So actually, as folks decide on referendums and things like that, over time, they are going to be paying less for that tax in the school referendums. So we're doing it. That's part of Governor Walz's One Minnesota idea, and that's something we pushed for in 2019. We're successful.
I applaud that, but I think overall it would be flattened across the state. It needs to be flattened across the state. And I think the only way to do that would be, a tax across, everybody pays a tax that goes into the school fund. Schools, when they need to They apply, they get the money, they can do what they need, what needs to be done. You kind of have a balance between local control of what's needed, but also the state collecting enough funding, to keep that fund going, kind of a education trust fund, if you want to call it that. And that'll even things out much better than trying to do a tax credit for the local county auditors to plug in.
Yeah, just taking a half step back to the point earlier about how, voters essentially want to see the goods delivered, essentially. I think something that I have seen is GOP candidates are very good at messaging about not necessarily what they are, but who they aren't. So when I organized last year in St. Cloud, and my experience was that we got hit in our districts with mailers essentially attaching the candidates in those districts to like things that are happening in the Twin Cities, like mobs. And there's like even caricatures of like Molotov cocktails are involved even. Essentially, like they weren't actually saying like, I'm this candidate for your GOP district, like vote for me because of X, Y, and Z. They're saying, don't vote for this person because they're with these people. And they weren't the only ones who were hit with these exact mailers. They were hit in the suburbs. I'm sure Jeff is very familiar with those. So I think one of the ways that we can really improve, at least for sure, and anywhere, especially in rural Minnesota, is our messaging, is showing who we are. And yes, delivering the goods is absolutely critical in that sense. But I believe in that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Just that messaging is going to be incredibly important, advocating who we are. And we can also paint things in who we aren't too, but in a better tone, I'd say.
Lisa? I had a question that went back to the minorities and stuff that you were talking about. In Lyon County, we have formed a strategic planning committee to work on some of those problems. And our top one right now is trying to meet diversity. And we're kind of stuck in the part where, how do we approach them? We have a lot of diverse people in Marshall. And they all kind of live in their own little cliques. And our biggest problem is we don't want them to first thought be to them is, you just want my vote. So if anybody has any, information on how to approach that, let me know. You do?
I don't have the answer to your question, but that did come up on the chat too. How do you engage people in such a way that it doesn't just appear that you just want their vote, that you really want them participating in the governments of the community and things like that? And how do you approach them? And Guillermo is on this, and I'm going to send out his information too, so that he might have some ideas if you're talking about the Latino community or something. So there's that. And unless somebody else comes on with this Zoom to say something else, I just want to say okay, then I'll send it over to Marcus first. I think you can get back to me about that issue. Yeah, just keep on going with that.
If nobody minds, I do have an answer, and it's kind of the most common answer that I think anybody ever has. And that is, well, if you look around, if we do this more often, we would feel much more like we're together and we understood each other. So the way to be able to go into a community, and I've done this, so I can say that for certain, they were closer to me than many, but is you're in their community regularly. You're having conversations with people on the regular. They know you. They respect you. Sometimes they literally love you. And the point is, that creates the bridges that means they'll never see you and think, oh, they're just after my vote. No, they'll see you and say, oh, she's here all the time. And she's really interested in what I have to say and my real problems. She knows the names of my kids. That is a bond that will bring not just them in, but everybody they know that has a problem. That problem comes in through those people or with them the next time you come along. That's the way you create those bridges, and it lasts for decades. It's real.
We're kind of farther back than that. We want to know how we approach them to get to know us. and how we get to know them.
Go into the, sorry.
And that door knocking would be, you would suggest door knocking?
Door knocking begins that process. And that first time, yeah, they're going to think you're just there for your vote, unless you're there on an off year. Show up at a time where there's no
That's why
voting
we're
to be done.
doing it right now, yeah.
Okay. That's the start. And as long as you keep going back there or keep setting up places where people can go, it will build. I promise you.
And I can say from experience where we're at in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, we're the most diverse community in the state. And it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't. It requires thinking about this, a commitment for the long term, but it's just first off, simply inviting people to a community event, showing up at open community events that various communities in your town have. And it's being there, being part, getting together, find whatever excuse you can to be able to be with other people. And the more you do that, the more that community builds, the more people start to talk, they become friends. You also spot leaders. We had spotted a woman who became a city council member. And we just saw here was a person who really wanted to do something. And we said, we can help. How about your community? Well, we're not sure how to organize. Well, we have that, but it's really more than anything, just being there. In fact, on a lot of our webinars, I hold up Jane Kleb's book to talk about how Metro people can help folks in the rural area, at least build those connections. That's a great book. It's called Harvest the Vote. We'll get that in a link to you. I got it. I keep it with me almost all the time. I have it here, but it's a great book, and that's another way to think about how we all need to just have more community. That's what it is. Showing up. She tells a great story where she follows a guy to from event to event, and a Republican guy, and he goes, we never see legislators like this, or we never see leaders like this. She goes, well, I'm here. And sure enough, she was at a lot of these, and they understood, because they got to know her, that this is not the devil. And actually, gosh darn it, on most of the issues, we actually agree. So a whole lot of that hard to get together part gets better when you just start hanging with people, even if it's for a beer, barbecue, whatever's going on.
Just send them an invite.
Send them an invite.
And we're getting close to the end of our time here. And so before we go, while I still have the mic in my hand, a lot of what George was saying and Marcus was saying was also the people on Zoom were saying the same thing, that just build those relationships, get out, start talking to people, get into their communities and things like that. I also want to just say, while I have the microphone, thank you. A lot of our Zoom people have had to hop off, but thank you for those who came on Zoom. Our technology wasn't such that they could just join in the conversation, so they had to do it through me. So I appreciate that they did that and they typed into the chat. So I want to thank them for coming today and being a part of this discussion in the very limited way that they could. So thanks.
Barb?
Oh, I want to say it's important to raise the minimum wage. About 10 years ago, I worked with Ryan Winkler and the AFL-CIO to raise the wage, because even, and I'm not, I like to talk about towns that are like 1,000 people, 2,000 people, because the more money people have, the more they can support your small local business. Right. Because if you're always, looking for the last dime at the end of the month, or the last dollar or whatever for a customer, they don't have the money to be going out and buying the cheeseburger or getting a hot beef sandwich or whatever they're looking for. So you have to raise the wage. I think it's the main thing of keeping these small rural businesses running, and for the people to have the money to support the small businesses. So that's what I have to say. Okay. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Barb, for hosting us, and Ron for coming up with the idea. He wanted some conclusions. I've heard a lot about us working better on delivering and getting the message out that we did actually deliver, and just pounding away at that out here, letting folks know what we're working on and what we're doing and what we're actually getting accomplished. That helps all of us, whether you're urban or rural. We got to do a better job of that. We found that there are some issues that we certainly have share the same priorities on, like healthcare and education. There are some differences out here in terms of accessibility to healthcare and education. We're in a community that has a school that's shared amongst 3 communities. So that's pretty common out here. So we've got a lot more to talk about on those things. Another conclusion I would say is just getting together more often like this, in person, if we can, or Zoom if we can, not following those perceptions that we might get from, something we see online or on the news, actually going and finding out for ourselves. And we all need to do that. It doesn't matter where we live. That's pretty clear from misperceptions that people out here have had on urban areas as well. So do you want to add some stuff, Jeff?
The last thing I would just add is that this idea of relational organizing, that's what we were kind of touching base on at the end of this conclusion. That's something I'm adopting in my own campaign for our election in 2022. And so instead of just being transactional, vote for me, now it's vote for me. But also, why is it that you don't think the government works for you? What issues make you tick? How can we deliver? How can we meet you in the middle? That sort of thing. And so relational organizing, I had a great conversation with a Harvard professor, Marshall Gans. He's helped a lot of folks get elected over the years. He was in Obama 8, Obama 12, Biden 20. He helped candidates get past this transactional of here's my information, vote for me. Well, that doesn't really do it for a lot of people. And so relational organizing is going to build the infrastructure, not just for now, but into the future for the next generation of people behind that want to run for office. And it'll grow the DFLs in places like Marshall, where there's colleges and universities nearby.
You think it would be better where I'm from.
Yeah, and Morris and other locations too. And I know that there's potential there. And so I think we should find a way to tap into that. But thank you all for being here today. I really learned a lot. I appreciate it. I've got a whole page of notes on my backside here. So thank you very much. Thank you for the people on Zoom too.
And we'll try to do this again. Thanks to George and Lisa for the technology. And hopefully those of you who didn't join us in person can come and eat with us next time. So any other words to pass on? Thank you. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and stay cool.